Rob, from a technical perspective, what are the main challenges faced by engineers on a track like Monaco?
Well, Monaco is really a circuit which is completely unique. You know, we never ever visit such a low speed circuit. We never ever visit such a circuit where you can run a very unique setup like you can run in Monaco. So a setup that has a very, very good front end and extremely good front end to get around the low speeds corners. On the other hand, it's extremely bumpy. And the engineers really have to think a lot about the car in braking, in acceleration, as it goes over the bumps, as it goes over the curbs in the chicanes, things like that. So it brings a lot of different aspects to it, you know, all of which you have to try to marry together and to get the best out of the weekend.
So how does the car setup change on such a particular circuit?
Well, you have to take into account how tight the corners are. There's two aspects. The corners are very, very tight, and there's not many high-speed corners. And due to that, we have to try to extract from the car a lot of mechanical grip. The clear direction is, or the most clearest direction would be with the aerodynamics of the car. So we run the absolute maximum downforce that we can, which would be very inefficient settings for other circuits, but actually work very well in Monaco because you don't really care about drag, you just care about downforce. Then in terms of the mechanical setup, most of the teams will run the weight very far rearwards. They will run very, very soft front end. They'll run a very, very stiff rear end, and that's to reduce the low speed understeer. In terms of the fundamental build of the car, you know, another thing that most of the teams will do, they'll run a different front suspension, and that's because in Monaco we have one of the tightest corners, or the tightest corner of the championship, the lowest hairpin.
We asked Felipe how different it was to drive in 2008 when he achieved the pole position on Saturday compared to today with different regulations and less downforce. Does this impact your work in order to try and find the best mechanical setup even more?
I think it possibly makes our work a little bit more difficult because obviously when you're dealing with a car that is essentially, when you take downforce off the car, the drivers always find it a little bit more difficult to drive. So that then for us brings compromises, because if you have a car that's very easy to drive, then you just concentrate on the understeer in Monaco. You just get rid of the low speed understeer and not really, you know, care less about the rear. On the other hand, when you have a car through regulations or whatever has less downforce, and therefore you have to think about the compromises that you have to make. You can't just concentrate on one aspect of the car, so yeah, it does make the setup a lot more difficult.
Can you describe the conversations between you and Felipe throughout practice sessions when you're trying to find the optimal car setup? Obviously he has pure driver feelings, but you have a lot of data at hand.
Yeah, I mean, it's a track where the circuit improvement, the track improvement itself, so how quick the track gets during a session is huge. I mean, Monaco is literally a street circuit, so it starts off very, very dirty with absolutely no rubber down from any cars whatsoever. And then as you go through the weekend and the sessions, the rubber increases a lot. So the driver starts to get more confident with the track starts to get more grippy. So you have to be very careful with all of the setup changes that you're making, that you're not just, they're not masked by the circuit improvements. So yeah, we do have a lot of data, but one of the main things that we need to do in Monaco is to let the driver run. If you let the driver run, then he will get more confident, he'll go them few inches closer to the barrier, and hopefully a better lap time comes.
Do you remember which race was the most difficult to manage on this track?
They're all difficult, to be honest, in Monaco. It's a good question. I don't know, I mean, if you take 2008, when Felipe was on pole, that was a wet race. It started off wet, you know, and it dried as a little bit through the race. We went backwards in that one. That wasn't so easy to manage. Felipe went up the slip road at turn 1. The pit stops are always very difficult to manage because people usually dive into the pits at the very last moment. There you have a small advantage that you can see over into the swimming pool chicane, and you can kind of have an idea if people are coming in or not a bit better than with normal tracks. But I think they're all quite difficult to manage because it's always between, you know, in the old days it was between 1 and 2 stop, maybe even more this year. You know, the tyres and the degradation are difficult to manage, the traffic is extremely difficult to manage, so I wouldn't say any of them were particularly easy.
You mentioned the swimming pool chicane. Do you think the drivers feel how quickly they're going through that part of the track?
I don't think they do. I don't think they have any idea about how quick they're going through that part of the track. It's a good question actually, because I have a good example of that. Some years back when I actually took a guy, we were working together, and while the GP2s were running, so they weren't Formula 1 cars, they were GP2s, and maybe even Formula 3000 cars in them days. And we stood on the entry to the swimming pool, you know, and we always talk about, you know, he needs to get, you know, he's too far away from the wall, or he needs to get a bit closer to the wall. And really what you're talking about is centimetres. And we stood on top of the curb, so the barrier, where the tyre barrier, and looked down, you know, and these guys were passing literally at about 200, 210 kph with this much gap to the barrier. And it kind of just makes you think and just have a little bit more respect for them when you talk about, oh, you need to do this or you need to do that, and you think, well, it's a pretty superhuman effort anyway. So,
which car components do you think are subject to greater stress or workload on this track?
Well, I mean, obviously it's a very, very low speed track, and being a very, very low speed track, it's not particularly difficult for suspension. Just simply because of the fact that you don't run at very high lateral loads, or you don't have very high longitudinal braking. It's not really a circuit where we worry too much about the mechanical components and the stress on mechanical components.